go.
I call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, January 24, 2022, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Before we get started, I'd like to thank members of the public for attending the school board business meeting to observe the work being done on behalf of all school district stakeholders. We appreciate the time you took to be here this evening. As a reminder, Northfield Public Schools requires all people over the age of 2 to wear a face covering while inside a school district facility, including during school board meetings. Dr. Hillman, we have some items in the table file.
Yes, we have we have several items in the table. Hold on, there we go. We have several items in the table file this evening. We have the results from the 2022A General Obligation Facilities Maintenance Bond Sale, which we're excited to have Shelby McQuay from Ehlers here to share that great news with you tonight. We also have something that's a very exciting gift agreement, a $100,000 anonymous donation to Northfield High School, specifically for some of it is unassigned and some is specifically for baseball improvements. So we're very grateful for that. There are several personnel items, including appointments, increase, decrease, changes in assignments, a leave of absence. We also have added the resolution, updated the resolution for the sale of the general obligation facilities maintenance bonds. We made a modest update to the COVID-19 safety protocols exit criteria, and we have added a retirement by agreement. That is the table file for tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Amy, second by Tom. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We now move on to the public comment portion of our meeting, and I have a statement that I will read before we have our first speaker. This is an opportunity for residents, business, and property owners, parents, guardians, students, and employees of the Northfield School District to address the board. All comments to the board must adhere to the guidelines set in place by District Policy 206 regarding public comment. This is not a time to debate an issue, but only for the board to hear your comments. You are prohibited from making comments about specific students, staff, and administrators. The board respects and values input, but when it relates to a specific individual or a specific matter, this input must be heard by the appropriate personnel, including the building principal or superintendent, and not during an open meeting of the school board. You will be gavelled out of order if your comments are not in compliance with these guidelines. Please address the board from the podium. After being recognized by the board chair, identify yourself and if you represent a group. We require that you limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You are not allowed to yield your time to another person. It is expected that members of the public will address their remarks with civility and respect. Personal attacks by anyone addressing the board are unacceptable. Please keep your mask on when speaking from the podium. The board has allotted up to a total of 30 minutes for public comment at regular school board meetings. I will now begin to call on those who have signed up to speak in the order in which they signed in. Vice Chair Amy Gerwitz will be monitoring the speaker's time. She will signal each speaker with the time they have remaining at 1 minute, 30 seconds, and 10-second intervals. Again, please make your comments as brief as possible, but no more than 3 minutes. We have one speaker tonight. Lori Williams, would you like to step up?
Holy cow, 3 minutes. I thought it was 5. Okay. Well, I'm here because I've been living in this community for a very long time.
Make sure you speak, just make sure that button is pressed. There's a
Red light. Okay, I'm here because I'm very concerned that due to everybody being in specialty niches in the world, not many people are looking at the whole panoramic view of what's going on worldwide. And I was distressed because I learned to really analyze the news and the money markets with my father. And when this first started happening, I was deeply concerned because it is a global rollout and it is a global coup d'etat and it's rolling out under a health crisis. I'm not saying people aren't getting sick. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not Republican, Democrat, none of that. But the bankers got together in Jackson Hole, Wyoming in August of 2019, and they approved the going direct reset. Well, and BlackRock came to educate them how they would take advantage of the next downturn. Shortly thereafter, here we go, off to the races. Health crisis, lock everybody in place, And my concern now is specifically towards the children, especially after hearing the Jewish rabbi's approach. He said, we're erring on the side of wisdom. We do not, throw caution to the wind. We are not recommending this, experimental gene therapy on our children and pregnant women or teenagers. We err on the side of wisdom. And I'm like, oh boy, this is really scary because the nanolipid particles in this stuff is being found in women's, children's, girls' ovaries. Yeah, 1 minute left. So I encourage you to look at the going direct reset. I encourage you to look at propaganda. It's one message all the time, all the time. This is propaganda. Please take one and pass it down. Dare you touch it. Our children are being harmed, and I have a question to this school board. I want to know how much money has been received in COVID relief money and what the terms and conditions were for receiving that money. I've come to find other places, they have to, in order to take this COVID relief money, we have to mask, we have to social distance, and we have to vaccinate. No wonder people are, kids can't play in the playground.
Thank you,
They
Lori,
can't do life. They
Thank
can't
you,
be
Lori.
kids.
Thank you.
They're
Thank
being
you, Lori.
turned into obedient slaves.
Thank you.
Read the politics of obedience. Oh yeah, turn me off. Can't have more of that.
Okay, we move on to announcements and recognitions. Dr. Hellman?
Yes, we have one announcement this evening, and I'm very proud to announce that January is Paraprofessional Month in Minnesota, and Governor Walz has proclaimed January 24th through the 30th as Paraprofessional Recognition Week in the state of Minnesota. So that's this week. And of course, we recognize our paraprofessionals for their good work that they do all of the time. But this week we step out and take some special opportunities to make sure that the community and our paraprofessionals know how much we appreciate their efforts. And we recognize all educational assistants and their contributions to support student learning and successful outcomes through small group and one-on-one instruction, instructional assistance, support, and assessment. So to all of our paraprofessionals, our educational assistants, as we call them here in Northfield Public Schools, we thank you for making a difference now and always. And we recognize you this week with Governor Walz's statewide proclamation.
Thank you. Board members, any other announcements you'd like to add? I was going to say, I saw Principal Antoine was recognized recently at the National Association of Elementary School Principals. I'm just going to say what a terrific honor that is. We are at items for discussion and reports. Our first presentation is the middle school roof bond presentation by Shelby McQuay with Fellers. We will vote on a resolution on the sale later tonight. Lee, welcome.
All right, thanks for having me tonight, and I will present the results of the bond sale, and congratulations, you received great results. So this sort of, it is on, okay. All right, so you authorized this last fall, I think it was November 22nd, and took action to authorize the bond sale. You're going to use a portion of your LTFM funds to pay the debt service on these bonds. So This is for the project, the middle school roofing project, and we anticipated that you were going to use about a 17% of your annual LTFM funds. And the results came in better, so we're anticipating a little less use of those funds. So I'll just walk through the results of the bond. So you have the the sale day report in front of you. So
That was in the table file, just for people to know.
okay. So you received 6 bids today. The low bid was 1.95, and we anticipated receiving about 2.17. So better results than we had anticipated. The winning bidder was FHN Financial Capital out of Memphis, Tennessee. The high bid, the 6th bid came in just under our pre-sale at 2.15. So the overall deposit to the construction fund was approximately 66,000 greater than we'd anticipated at the time of pre-sale. So the roofing project was about 3 million, and that's what we were looking to put in. But because of the timing with the bond sale and when you had bids, we were able to work within the parameters of the sale and put a little bit more bond proceeds into the construction fund while still staying about $22,000 under where we anticipated principal and interest payments. So I'll just walk through the attachments beginning with the bid tabulation. So those are beginning on the sale day attachments, page 1, where you can see FHN Financial was the winning bidder, BOK out of Milwaukee, Northland and Piper out of Minneapolis, another Baird out of Milwaukee, and Raymond James out of Memphis. So national attention on the bonds today. And one of the reasons for that is your excellent credit rating of the AA plus. And so that you're in kind of a slim group of school districts that receive that rating, and that goes to your financial management, your overall economy in Northfield, and is very commendable. The 2 others that are rated on par with that are Osseo and Anoka Hennepin. So 2 of the largest districts in the state just have a wealth of resources in their tax base available to them. So I think that's really commendable to be on that at that rating. So the sources and uses is on page 3. The bond amount there, 3.12, and it was a little bit of a premium bid, which means that the underwriter paid slightly higher amount than the par amount of the bonds, and that amount could be deposited into the construction funds. You can see the available for project costs is 3.17. The debt service schedule that Val will pay attention to each August and February, as she always does, is listed on that next page. And then the overall LTFM is on plan is on page 5. So you can see your estimated total revenue annually is about 1.6 million. You do receive a portion of that in aid and a portion of that through your local tax levy. You do have an existing bond outstanding, and that's under your existing bond column in your remaining revenue. And then we applied the new debt service on that remaining revenue. And that 1.95 and the slightly lower principal and interest means you're using approximately 16% of your annual LTFM revenue. So you have a little over $1.3 million remaining if we don't account for any changes in pupil units. You can see on the next page, that sale day attachments, page 6, the portion, it's the dark blue bar at the top. It's your annual levy that you're using to make these debt service payments. I think what's notable here on this page is that once that annual levy turns into a debt service payment, it goes into the calculation of the ag credit. You're about 12% ag in this community, so your property tax payers that are owners of ag property will see a moderate benefit to that component. The last attachment is your rating report. So confirming that AA plus rating, and you have the AAA credit enhanced rating on the issue. And I think it's notable here that they did discuss in committee that you have those upcoming budget cut discussions of about approximately $4 million on the table. And so they did not want to take any action in regards to the fiscal year 23 budget deficit projection, but did take note that you were going into discussions on that budget. So overall, great results tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this informational item or your action item later this evening.
Thank you, Shelby. Are there any questions or comments, board members? Julie?
Shelby, thank you for being here. I just want to thank you and Ellers for your work. We had an opportunity to visit before the meeting and say how incredibly skilled and your knowledge and experience about when you go out for bond sales. And clearly today was a good day. So we really appreciate that. We also touched on the market or the federal government considering some the Federal Reserve, I believe, is who dictates when interest rates might be increased, and they're anticipating that for March. How do you see that playing out with construction costs and some of the other, supplies and things that we run on a day-to-day operation of the district with suppliers maybe having to borrow money, and what that ultimately does for the consumer? I don't know if I could speak to the construction costs. I know just from being a part of a lot of these meetings, the construction costs are rising at a faster rate than we would see kind of general consumer goods, maybe because of the supply chain issues there. The feds set a target interest rate, and munis tend to follow that. They're a little bit delayed. Ever since March of 2020, they've sort of not been as coinciding as they have in the past. But there is enough research to suggest that the muni or municipal bond yields follow the treasury on just a delayed basis. So in terms of how that might affect overall construction costs, I probably should just stick to my
No, yeah,
my
I
own
understand.
area and not
No,
speak to that. I know you did receive higher than anticipated bids than you were expecting. So
no, thank you. I appreciate that. And then when you said $66,000 additional would be put into the construction fund
yeah,
as a result of the sale. So what are the, this might be a question for Val. That's different than LTFM, but what, do we have restrictions around what that $66,000 could be utilized for?
So any project over $2 million is required to be run through the construction fund. So
Oh,
it's still the middle school roof and LTFM funds, but it's just classified in a different fund because it's over $2 million. That's a Minnesota Department of Ed requirement. So the 66,000 is just available for project costs. And because we already know our bid for the roof came in more than that, we're just gonna put it to offset that, because we were planning to use just general fund LTFM to help supplement that. But now it'll be a little bit less that we'll have to do for that. But if we were to ever have more than the project costs, then we would transfer it to debt service. And then those funds can go to pay off the debt service.
Okay, so we do have that flexibility.
Mhm.
Okay, excellent. Thank
Any other comments or questions? All right, well, I wanted to make sure and jumped on that bandwagon, the high compliment to Val for the high rating. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Shelby. Appreciate you. Okay, next we have Hazel Reinhardt presenting our demographic study, and Hazel will come up in just a bit here. And she's a demographer who's done a previous study for the district, and so her report is in the packet. Whenever you're ready, Hazel.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. I'm going to try and keep track of the time here because I tend to get very enthusiastic and talk about this more than people have the capacity to listen. The first thing I'd like to do is to really talk a little bit about the environment for making school enrollment projections at this point in time, because some of these things may or may not be familiar to you, but I want to really underscore them. One, we are in a period of very low fertility. That is, women are not having many children as they complete their childbearing years. And that means that the number of births are decreasing in the United States and in Minnesota. Births are going down, okay? And what that means is that in 5 to 6 years, there are fewer kindergarten students. And their rates of fertility vary by geography, but it's going to be very difficult to beat that, to escape that, I think. So what that really means is that you need to be prepared for a smaller number of kindergarten students. We not only know in the next 5 years, but most likely in that period from 2027 to 2031. So it's a longer term thing. Now, added to what the trend was, there's a consensus among demographers that the pandemic will result in fewer births for several years. Okay, depress it even more. And whether it can bounce back from that is an open question. Replacement fertility, 2.11 children per woman at the end of childbearing. In Minnesota, it's now standing at 1.73. So you can see it's getting down. Now, among the developed nations of the world, we still have the highest fertility rate. For example, China stands at 1.2. This last year, they had an 18% drop in births. So it's a global phenomena. So that's a very important point. The other thing that's important is that as our population ages, and for other reasons that we're not completely clear about, fewer people are moving. Since the Second World War, we had on average 18 to 20% of the population changed its address every year. That didn't mean it necessarily moved any distance, but there was a lot of movement of people. It's now less than 10% a year. So the idea that a lot of people are going to be moving around is a sort of an old idea now. It's not a new reality. Then as the population ages, we're going to see a demand, and we are seeing it now, for different mix in new housing. There's greater demand for multiple family housing, apartments, condos, townhouses, that sort of thing, than for single family detached units. And it's single family detached units that have the greatest per student yield per unit. So I say to people, don't get excited about apartment buildings. Don't get excited about townhouses. Keep your eye on the single family detached units, because those are the ones that will yield school age children. Minnesota has profited a great deal from immigration from abroad since the late 1980s. That has slowed to a trickle. And so now in the state of Minnesota, our population is back to a pattern of net outmigration. And by that, I mean more people leave the state of Minnesota every year than come to it. So we're in a different environment than we were, let's say, 5-7 years ago. Now, let's talk about COVID-19 and its effects. We know that in Minnesota and nationwide, but we're going to talk here specifically about Minnesota, the public school enrollment declined as a result of the pandemic in 2021, the school year. And that decline in public school enrollment was heavily concentrated in kindergarten classes. That is, they are smaller. As these students were being redshirted, by that I mean their parents were keeping them at home, they were not attending any school, or they were being homeschooled. And for the first time in years, private school enrollment increased in Minnesota as people sent their children to private schools, largely because they had in-person classes. So not only did kindergarten enrollment decrease, but the other elementary grades often lost students as well. Middle school and high school enrollment was less affected. Okay. Now, what happened in the Northfield public schools? Well, a couple of things. In 2021, you had a smaller kindergarten class than usual. However, when I look at the data, those I'll call the missing students appear to be back in the Northfield public schools in grade 1. And homeschool enrollment is still a little bit higher than typical, maybe 20 students or so. But I would generally say that the Northfield Public Schools have pretty much come through the disturbance, the disruption of the COVID-19. Okay, I think unless something really dramatic happens again, I think you're pretty much through that environment. Now, there are a couple of atypical events in your 2021-22 enrollment that I don't understand, and no one has been able to give me an answer, but they're worth considering. One is that significantly fewer students transferred into grade 9 than in previous years. And that's been a pattern. You pick up students at the beginning of high school. This year was a very, very small number, and I'm not certain why. And then net out migration from grade 9 to 10, which is atypical for you as well. So something strange going on there, and that may write itself very quickly up there, but something to keep in mind. And one of the things that's a reality in Minnesota is the effect of COVID-19 has basically slowed down activity in Minnesota's departments, education and health, two that I'm most interested in, to a crawl. They are not able to get data out and published on a timeline like they used to. So we're looking at 2019-20 data here. But what I wanted to look at here with you is the extent to which you experience competition from other education choices. And as you can see, a smaller percentage of district residents who are of school age attend traditional private schools or parochial schools. Homeschool population here is a little higher than it is statewide. In public options, you are a net in open enrollment in. You see 10.6% of your enrollment is non-resident students, and a smaller percentage out, 5.2, compared to statewide is 8.7. Charter schools, about the same percentage as statewide. And you have a slightly higher capture rate than statewide. So in a sense, and competition tends to be increasing. Now let's look at kind of a summary of what happened with enrollment in the past 10 years. Since 2011-12, enrollment increased by 11 students. It went up and then it went down. Non-resident students increased from 276 to 454, which was what produced the growth in enrollment at all. And non-residents are about 12% of your enrollment as of 2021-22. Now, resident enrollment decreased by 167 students, or minus 4.7%. The reason you had any growth at all is the number of non-residents increasing. And then when I estimate the district school age population, I estimate that it decreased by 90 students, or minus 2%. So the moral of this story is that the number of school-age children in this district is declining slowly. So that's a concept that is not easily accepted by people, but it is a reality. And here I'm just showing you the enrollment and the exclusion of 4 independent study students is for 2021-22. Not, it should have been a little clear. It's not every year that there were 4 independent study students. You can see the trend here. You can see how resident enrollment peaked in the school year of 2016-17. I have that bolded. Demographers like to look at the components of a change, and it can be looked at in school enrollment just as you would for general population. In the population as a whole, natural increase is the difference between the number of births and the number of deaths. Here, it's the difference between the number of incoming kindergarten students and the outgoing grade 12. And as you can see, your numbers are always negative, and they will always be negative because you have an inflow at grade 6 and at grade 9, which always means that you will have more students graduating out than you have coming in. You'll notice that net migration has always been positive. However, when you look over the 10 years, that difference between the outgoing students versus the incoming was 1,001 students. Net migration was 1,012, for a net change of 11. So that tells us what the components are here. I'm showing you enrollment here, not because I necessarily want you to focus on every number, but there are some things I look at with a chart like this that I'd like to share. One, I always look across the row at the kindergarten, size of the kindergarten class, and what's happening to it. And see, we can see the effect of the pandemic in 2021 at the 2004, which was surrounded by about 2045, if you want to kind of average them, 2050, 60, whatever. So we can see that effect there. We can see what appears to be a fairly strong bounce back afterwards. The other thing we can look at this is look at it on the diagonal, which is the way we calculate the net migration. So if you look at that kindergarten class of 2011-12 at 269, it came 270 at grade 1, 266 at grade 2, 274 at grade 3. You see how that goes down. And by grade 10, there were 351 of them. And the reason there were 351 is because we had an inflow at grade 6 and an inflow at grade 9. So that's the calculation. Then the other thing I look at carefully is the last column, the most recent year of enrollment. And you'll see here, what I want to point out is in 2020-21, you had a kindergarten of 204, but you had a first grade of 233. And that isn't because a lot of people suddenly moved into the district. It's kids that were at home, whatever, who now came. So everyone see that kind of concept that we're working on here. Now here's the tale of the reality here. In 2007, in the United States and in Minnesota, we had the largest number of births since 1964. And as you can see, it's been going down statewide ever since. And I'm also showing you Rice County, which I'm going to use as a proxy for projecting kindergarten here. First peaked here 1 year earlier in 2006. And they have declined, as you can see, over that 15-year period from 794 to 720. Now, I take those births which are reported as a calendar year, and I adjust them for a school year, and I call that then the pool, the kindergarten pool. So it's 2/3 of the births of 1/3 of the births of 2005 and 2/3 of the births of 2006. So the pool, and what I want to call your attention to is what happens to the size of that pool. And especially in the years that for the kindergarten class of 2022, 23, 23, 24, well, it'd be 24, 25, got 23, 24 twice. But you see it declines from 781 to 772 to 736 to 722. And the percentage is the percentage your kindergarten is of that pool. And if we look at those numbers, you can see that we've had a couple of low numbers. The class of 2013-14 was lower in the pool, as of course was 2020-21. And 2021-22 is also not as high as it was for the previous years. It's running somewhere more around the 34% or so. So the share of the pool has decreased recently. Since 2011-12, looking at all those years, it averaged 33.4, and then you can see these slight decreases that have been affected by the last couple of years. So for making projections, I took a low average of the past 4 years, 32.7, and a high of 33.4, which is the average of the last 11 years. And then I look at Rice County's births as a percent of Minnesota. They've decreased slightly. The average was 1.09 in the past 5 years, so I assume that for the next 5, 6 years. I'm using the projection made by the Minnesota State Demographer for 0-year-olds, but I'm pointing out to you that they have overprojected the number of births consistently. I then made an adjustment out to 2020, 21, 22, on and on to try and get to something that's a little more realistic, about 93% of the original projection. What is significant to me, whether you look at their original projection or my adjustment, is how flat those numbers are. Okay, so that doesn't, first will vary around that, kindergartens will vary up and down, but I think you need to think of them sort of just varying around those numbers, not a trend up or anything like that. It's going to tend to be rather flat. So now in the bold numbers here, here's my pool based on Rice County. The bolded numbers are births that have already occurred, and then the non-bolded ones are projections. So the kindergarten pool for this year, 21-22, had 781 kids. We're dropping to 772, 736, 722. And then I think based on that flat projection, we're seeing 720 to 719. So that's what I mean when I say anticipate smaller kindergarten classes. And then I take that pool and multiply the percentages there, 32.7, 33.4. Both of them, the low one is averaging a little bit lower than you were this past year. The higher one is about what it's been this past year. You have a year up, down, and then you're coming in at about 240 a year. And we can see in the past 10 years, there were 2,497 kindergarten students put into the school system. You'll see this would put 2,425 at the high kindergarten projection, just a little bit below what you experienced in the past. The other one's a little lower. Now, this already tells us that we are likely to see enrollment decline. Now, in net migration, which we saw from that diagonal letter, aggregated it here. These are, of course, the raw numbers, aggregated them, K5, 6, 8, 9, 12. And you can see that we've had a long history, really, of having net in-migration of K5. Now, this would most likely be newer people to the district, okay? And you see the effect again of 2019 to 2020, which is the impact of the COVID-19. Now you see at 6 to 8, this is where we have an inflow at grade 6 with big numbers in and all positive. And at 9, 12, we have large numbers. And we have both the inflow at grade 9 in high school, but you also have, because of your ALC, what are probably 13-year 12th graders, people who are being retained, because very few people move their child at the 12th grade if they can at all avoid it. So the numbers you see there, I think, are people staying another year in school. Now here are the numbers by grade, by the grade transition. And you can see I've bolded out where you have the net inflow in. At the 8 to 9, you see you're running 25, 30 something. This year was 5, which is just abnormal, atypical. And then the 11 to 12, see, I don't think you have that many people entering at 12th grade here. So I think it's students that are remaining in school. But that's what it looks like in what constitutes how we get to the sense of what the movement of students has been. And then this is basically the percentage of it, which we call a survival rate, and that's the percentage that are retained or lost. Now, anything 1.000 means that the same number of students are present the next year in the next higher grade. If it's above the 1.00, it's a net in, below it's a net out. And as you can see, between grade 5 and 6, you basically get in about a 10% bump every year. And at 8 to 9, at the 9th grade, it's running, well, recently it's been running 10%, but certainly if you ever see it, 8.5, 9, somewhere in there. So you get the sense that that's what happens typically every year. The other thing that's really interesting here is at that 11 and 12, look at how much higher the survival rates are in the last 2 years compared to what they were previously. So I don't know what may have caused that. Sometimes things just happen, there's no explanation for it. See that now. The reason I call that to your attention is that in the projections, I didn't think those too high rates were likely to continue given the long history of basically seeing rates below that. So I'm looking for ways to get a sense of what that those survival rates will be in the coming years. And so I took the 2 years prior to the pandemic and averaged them. And then the high is the past 3 years, which gave me the bump of this last year. But then I needed to make adjustments. And I made adjustments at K to 1 because it just didn't look realistic given what had happened, at 8 to 9, and at 11 to 12. And once I did that, they didn't produce that much difference in the migration rates. So those were the three grade transitions that were producing the variability. So combining the base population of the enrollment in 2021-22, kindergarten projections, the survival rates, in 10 years, 2031-32, enrollment projected to decrease. It was 3810, projected from down to 3,396, 3,400 to 3,480, 3,400, 3,450, somewhere in there. Kindergarten is projected to be smaller than the previous year's grade 12, and I told you that's just inevitable because of the inflow at 6 and 9. Net migration projected to continue, driven by that transferring of students at grade 6, grade 9, and what I call 13-year seniors. And here are the projections. And what this pattern tells us is that the kindergarten assumptions are really the tail that's wagging the dog, that account for most of the variability. And then I take those projections and I divide them into your building arrangements, how you're delivering education. And we'll do a sheet here. First 5 years, K5 is 10 to 59 students smaller. At the low end, it's basically no change. At the high end, 59 students spread over 6 grades. The only difference it makes is less state aid. Otherwise, you can't save anything. 68, 88 to 98. Now notice this, the impact it's having in the later grades. Okay, and then high school 68 to 106 smaller. So as we go up in grades, it's because of the movement of these smaller cohorts as they age through the grades. And then as you see in 10 years, you get potential for a little bit of recovery at the K-5 because the decrease is only 39 as opposed to 59 to 90, but you see the loss at the middle school and high school. That's as these current students, smaller cohorts are moving through. Now, one of the cohort survival method is really the best method, has a lot of advantages, but it's not very adept, nor is the projector very adept at changing the assumptions if you know that new housing units are going to be built. So I was looking here for data on housing units. And first of all, projections are not readily available. Local units of government tend to be very hesitant to make projections, especially longer term. I like to get 5 years. Some of them are even reluctant to do 3 years. So the city of Dundas was willing to make their projections and put them out there. City of Northfield, very hesitant. So I took data from this Northfield housing study, which was released in March of 2021, so it's very recent. And you can see in that report, we have a projection of 180 single family, 226 apartments, 88 senior units, Dundas 55010. So you see 235 single family units. Now, from studies I have done in 4 states that are replicated and the results support each other, there is a variation in the yield in single family detached units from district to district. There is no variation in yield in townhouses or apartment units. Okay. So, based on your previous study, you had a pretty high yield from your new single family detached, new. And so based on that, I'm saying if those units are built, and most of them were underway or and they yield 0.60 students, so slightly more than a half a student, you would get 141 K-12 students in that new housing. And about half of these, based on the ratios you had before, would be elementary students. The apartment units are likely to yield only 0.11 to 0.15 Northfield Public School students. That is, you need 10 units to get 1 kid. So that would say 25 to 35 K-12 students. And nearly all of these students would be elementary students. Now, what this says to me is that if the projected units are built and the yields are as assumed, the enrollment decrease projected by the cohort survival method could be moderated by about 50% first 5 years. And elementary enrollment might remain near its current level. Okay. And this, of course, assumes that the per unit yields of current housing units do not decrease as children age out of school, or that competition does not take a larger share of the students. What we always have to be aware of is that the existing universe is also changing on us all the time. And especially as the population ages, more and more housing units don't have children in them, school-age children. So basically, the saying here is that in this, I think the disruption caused by COVID-19 has basically worked its way through the Northfield Public Schools at this point without any other unforeseen issues with that. I mean, if we continue to have one variant after another, that becomes another challenge, but we remain optimistic that this will be the last major variant uh, run through the population. Uh, we know from recent studies that a higher percentage, ever growing percentage, the last study was 44% of the population 18 to 49 either does not plan to have any children or have an additional child. It's a very high percentage. So we think that that will continue to keep fertility low, which then affects the number of kindergarten students. So it looks like enrollment will decline with the larger decline being at the middle school and high school roll through. And if this housing comes online and has the yield that we have, it would moderate it by about 50%. Now, housing units will continue to be built, no question about that. But it's likely as we, if we think it's hard to even stretch our minds to 2030, but they're likely to have ever more units built for senior citizens, other old folks. This is what makes the world we're living in different from anything we knew, is that we are growing old. And a basic demographic principle is that once the population is old, it can never get young again. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Hazel. That was a very thorough report. Board members, any questions or comments? Jeff?
Yeah, thanks for your work. I know you've been very consistent and accurate over the years, so kind of legendary in your own right. One of the things I'd ask, and I thank you for the report. When I look at this and I see, Northfield, we've got a little bit of a bubble here, but are there, some things to point out about, other, within our geographic or conference, just to take a look at, what's happening somewhere else, say a Red Wing in New Prague, a Faribault, by comparison, just so we kind of have something to, instead of being in a bubble, to take a look at that. And obviously not now, I'm sure you wouldn't know that. Maybe you do, but, I always like to see, where are we at with Northfield compared to,
Well, I have not done Faribault, but I would tell you that Faribault has a different population. than we have.
absolutely.
And so they're going to have more births.
Mm.
Okay. I'm familiar with Owatonna, down the road a little bit. And Owatonna is also in facing decline,
Right.
has for some time. It depends on where you are in the state. For example, down the highway even further, Austin is growing. Okay. Places like Red Wing, the like, not so much. Around the Rochester area, it depends where you are around Rochester. If you are on the corridor of 52, you will see growth. If you're not, you probably won't. Okay. It's a very checkered pattern in the metro area. Along the I-94 corridor, districts surrounding St. Cloud, some of them are experiencing growth, and in large measure because there's huge open enrollment out of the St. Cloud district.
Mm.
So you have this rapid increase in enrollment. Some of them have had to, they've ended open enrollment. Okay. As you get farther afield, if you get into very agricultural areas, you'll see decline, and sometimes very precipitous, simply because the population has shrunk and there are not many young women. Lower fertility rates are more likely to occur in big urban areas than they are in smaller towns, simply because more professional women with other opportunities. That's one of the things driving lower fertility, is that women have other opportunities and are choosing not to have children or have fewer children. So it's, I would say, you're basically in a good position. Things could be a lot worse.
And one other follow-up question. I mean, it seems like if we go down, back 10 years and looked at, with an assumption that maybe we're going to be down, 400 students. So it's kind of like, marketing 101, what do we do to, make up for that gap over time and what strategic things? I mean, I know we do really well on, in a lot of respects, an open enrollment, but it's kind of like, what other things can we do to make Northfield stand out that we can make up for that gap? I mean, that's not a question for you, but I mean, obviously the number,
Well, there are a couple things,
okay,
some of them not easy at all. And one is the growth of Northfield and its population.
economic growth too.
Yeah.
Right.
And that growth needs to have people with families. And I think Northfield now is a spectacular place for retirees.
Right.
A wonderful place for retirees. In fact, I personally know a number of people who have retired to Northfield. So it's growth and economic growth, which will bring younger working age people. And as I say, that's not so easy to accomplish. Things that, and I don't say it's easy, but to retain your own students in the district as opposed to, you have a pretty healthy charter school population now. And that's something you want to keep an eye on. I mean, what are parents looking for? As I say, I think the homeschool population in this district has pretty much worked its way through from the pandemic. But I'm surprised by the number of people who have opted for homeschooling last year who seem to be continuing it this year. So that's another, I think being very aware of, you talk about marketing. Marketing is about meeting what people's needs, expectations, wants, desires, all of those sorts of things. And of course, you can't meet everyone. So it's that kind of thing.
And thank you. One last comment, and I really thought interesting on your single family talking about, 0.06. So basically a house, will generally net you,
That's in this district. I
Okay,
can tell you
right.
a lot of them were net you 0.3.
right. Okay, right. So basically, really one student per house and then maybe,
Well, a half a student. per
half,
house.
half a student a house and then maybe 10 apartments for one. So, I mean, you can see obviously people, what you want, family growth that, I mean, single family obviously is a big thing, but I mean, it's too bad nowadays that, houses are, 300 to 500, kind of from the start,
You-
unfortunately, right?
Well, there was the mention earlier about the construction costs.
Right.
Well, that's affecting housing as
Right.
well. And costs are escalating pretty rapidly now, construction new units. And the other thing, of course, which is different, I'm just fascinated by this set of numbers. In 1950, which I remember, the square footage of a new house was 1,200 square feet.
Right.
In 1970, it was 1,600 square feet.
Right.
Now it's 2,600 square feet
Right. Double.
with fewer people, which speaks to the amount of stuff we have. Plus, I sort of say tongue in cheek that we obviously expect to entertain in the bathroom because we're building them all very large or in the closets. So we're driving up costs by our desire to have more and more space.
Thank you.
Dr. Hammond?
I just want to make a follow-up on Jeff here. First of all, Hazel, as you know, I'm one of your groupies. Hazel is the preeminent K-12 demographer in the state, and she never disappoints. So thank you, Hazel. 10 years ago, Hazel came here and I'm very happy that we outperformed because 10 years ago, Hazel shared with us that we could anticipate to go down by around 200 students over 10 years. So this is to Jeff's point about marketing or about people seeking Northfield as their education destination. There is only one reason we closed that gap, and it was open enrollment. No question about it. So I think that open enrollment goes hand in hand with the housing issue. Because we have people, we know, we have many examples of people who are trying to come here for the schools, but cannot find a home in their price range due to some of the things that Hazel just shared. So they're having to move into a community adjacent to us and then are open enroll. We would have had this declining enrollment materialize if we didn't have open enrollment. And that goes along with, as Hazel shared, with the 13th year senior, we have a very vibrant area learning center that does bring kids in juniors and senior year because of the opportunities that that program has. So I think the open enrollment, I think the housing piece, let's just take stock in this data, which is actually a little frightening to me. Even if we hit every one of the houses that we're projecting, we can only make up half of the decline. Think about that for a minute. So it does show that there's this concept that the housing shortage that we have in our community, we are not even projecting to get halfway out of that in the next 10 years. That's a problem for our growth. And the reality is you do the multiplication by how much per student is, and you do that cascading over that decade, we are going to have to, as we know, we're going to a budget prioritization process because of this issue. Now, the good news is 10 years ago, we thought we were going to lose about 200 kids. Open enrollment, some other things that we did, we have opportunities for growth with things like our Portage program. We have always had a very strong homeschool population, so slightly larger right now than it has been in the past, but we've always had a very strong homeschool population. So I think that, Jeff, when it goes to thinking about attracting people, we are attracting people because in terms of traditional public school open enrollment, we are a big winner on that. We do it to ourselves in terms of we are the authorizer for our 2 charter schools, and we just think they do a great job. We look at them as part of our educational community. But it comes down that we are attracting people through open enrollment, and we believe we could even attract more people if the housing would grow with the demand. There are some other things that we're working with some other entities about how can you make Northfield even more attractive, but you really can't make it a lot more attractive because there aren't any place you can't buy a house, right? So when the housing inventory is not going out commensurate with the number of people who wish to be here, we are going to be playing catch up, and we don't have control over that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Hazel. It's just so great to see you again.
Thank you.
Great. Amy. Oh, I'm sorry, Noel.
When you were here thank you very much. When you were here some time ago, you said one of the biggest problems in Northfield is that there are not starter homes for people to move into. I don't think that's changed very much. The contractors that I talked to say the easiest, the most profitable home you build is one between 250 and 300,000. And the contractors that were building starter homes, not here any longer. So I think the community is, so to speak, shooting itself in the foot because we're not providing what we need to build a community with starter families. Is that?
Well, I don't dispute that. I think one of the real challenges is the economics of
Speak
home
up a
building.
bit.
I think one of the challenges is the economics of home building. That unless you are in the position to subsidize contractors, they're going to go for the market where they have a margin.
And there are people that want to move to Northfield for that very reason.
You know, I have friends who live here. I have no question at all that this is a desirable place. But it's the challenge is you can't get developers with enough resource to spec very much, which they will in larger areas. You know, they'll build on spec. Hard to do it in a community of this size. So it's a more cautious approach, which then you never quite catch up.
Thank you. I would guess being a demographer during a pandemic is a little difficult.
It has. I must say, when I tell you you've been through the biggest part, well, the disturbance here was not as great as I've worked in some Twin Cities districts where it's enormous. It's enormous. And I don't know that it's going to be worked out in 5 years. But that's the challenge. You just don't know how many of these students can be recaptured. Or whether the recapturing will occur at middle school or at high school. So yes, it's difficult, and it's also difficult right now to get data.
Thank you. Amy?
Thank
wanna
you.
have-
Again, I want to thank you like everyone else. And I have 3 questions for you. The first I think is quick and easy. Now, were our Portage students included in this? Okay, so
Yes.
they were all counted.
Yep.
The second question is a little bit more about the pandemic's effect. I can understand why people might not be having children during the pandemic, but could you explain why they think immediately after the pandemic or then a few years afterwards?
Well, there are a lot of things, as I read studies and surveys, there are a lot of things that are weighing on young people. Okay. The pandemic and the uncertainty, climate change and its uncertainty, and just simply the fact that I don't want to say young people are more selfish because I don't think they are, but they have more opportunities than people of my generation had, especially women. And so it is no longer sort of a given that, oh, I'll get married and I'll have children. No, I have a choice.
All right.
And I think if we look at it, the typical pattern for a white non-Hispanic woman is to get her education and establish a career. By this time, she's probably 35 years old. And she either has a very strong desire to be a mother, or she says, well, you know, I kind of like my life the way it is. That's not a question you tend to ask yourself at 21. So I think part of it is also related to that shift in the median age of childbearing.
So what I'm trying to extrapolate from what you're saying then to answer my question is that women have, because of COVID, further postponed their
Yes.
childbearing, and then they're that much older, and then they get to the point of like, well, why bother at this point? Or, you know, I don't want to do it. Okay.
Well, start to think, concern, will COVID affect my unborn child? Is this a good time to be pregnant? And especially when women have the means to regulate that in terms of birth control.
Yeah, I would almost wonder the opposite, if the women would be like, okay, COVID's over, I can finally have my children. So I guess we'll see how that goes. But my last question for you is, I was going through all your numbers with you, and there was one piece that I missed, and I was wondering if you could just cover that again. When you talked about projected Minnesota 0-year-olds, then you adjusted the number by 93.8%. And I didn't get where you got the 93.8% from.
It's the gap between the projection and actual births.
From earlier years then. All right.
In 2019, and yeah,
Okay.
the projection is that much higher than and in fact, the gap, if you run the percentages, the gap keeps on increasing between the projection and the actual number of births.
Okay, thank you.
So that's why.
Thank you. Tom?
Also, thank you for your report. I like lots of numbers. So you focused on Rice County, but our school district is also part of Dakota County where I live, and Hennepin County or Goodhue County. Is there any growth, any or is that just not a significant
Well,
amount?
it's
Or
not a significant, it's not where your student population lives or where most of your population is. But more to the point, births in Dakota County have fallen pretty dramatically. Dakota County is aging pretty quickly. And the only area in Dakota County that now has the potential for significant development is in the Rosemount area, that Amber Fields, the old Umore Park, whatever. Otherwise, not much is happening in the northern part of the county. And I don't know the extent. I think the retention of agricultural land in the southern part of Dakota County, that the impetus to keep it agricultural is probably pretty strong. Goodhue County also, not much happening. The thing, it's hard to convey the significance of the population aging. Just really hard to convey that. Some numbers that are sort of interesting at the founding of our country, 1790. The median age, meaning half the population was above, half below, was age 10. At the beginning of the Civil War, it was 16. Now it's nearly 40. So, I mean,
and I get that, and I'm so our population is living longer, our healthcare and whatever is allowing us to do that. And had that happened 100 years ago, that same middle section, the 25 to 55, would have aged with it. And I guess
it's
I'm not.
not only the living longer, it's having fewer children.
But the older population aren't, the older population aren't having kids, obviously.
No.
So the fact that we have more, does that really impact anything?
Yeah, a lot of them are voters. So that's another thing you need to keep your eye on, is keeping these old voters happy for bond issues and the like. They are, the elderly population is sopping up a lot of resource. I mean, if you look at the Minnesota state budget and the percent that's going for nursing homes and the like, it's a huge percentage. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Corey?
Hi Hazel, thanks for being here. I think I'm gonna have two questions for you. So I was early in my career during the Great Recession, and I'm seeing some similarities here economically with what happened in 2007, 2009. No doubt that has an effect on this, but so does housing. So does folks aging in place. So does the climate, like you said. I'm curious, in your experience over your career, what parallels you've seen from this last economic year with the recession and the recovery to 2007 to 2000 to 1987. I look at the resident births. Obviously, we saw a pretty big drop in 2008, 2009, and so on. So clearly, there wasn't as much certainty and faith, I would guess, in the economy at that point. And
But you see, it never really bounced back very much.
right,
That
and
was
that's
the
a
thing.
generational thing, I'm guessing,
Yeah.
right? So
I think the biggest difference in the economy now, actually, the economy is very good. It's very good. What's happened is that a lot of people have dropped out of the labor force, and a huge number of people are retiring, maybe a bit early. It's certainly true in healthcare. People burned out and saying, I've had it. I can retire. I've dealt with this COVID enough. The working at home remote work has changed people's perception of, of jobs. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal today, it's going to be harder to be a jerk because people have decided they don't have to take that anymore. So I think the economy is actually very good. There are more jobs than there are workers. Wages are going up. Unfortunately, inflation is outpacing it right now. But it's different than the Great Recession when we had a large number of people come into the labor force and there weren't jobs. This way, we have a lot of jobs. Now, there's a mismatch in skills. One of the things that we're seeing, and I think maybe we'll see more of it, is employers investing more in training, educating people on their dime as opposed to the individual's dime, which would be more of a return to the pre-1965 environment. Pre-1965, thereabouts, most large companies ran their own MBA programs. They really educated their own managers and the like. Then after that, with the onslaught of the baby boom, really, we shifted that to the individual. And where are we today? Huge debt.
So let me reframe the question, not so much about the raw numbers, because I agree the economy is doing well and there's volatility in the stock market, obviously, all the time. But psychologically, what do you think happens to people following recession? And for my generation, I'm a millennial, twice in a decade having to deal with an economic downfall and thinking about the longevity of that and what appears to be more volatility as the world gets bigger. Have you seen a change in the last 50 years and how people respond to that in general? That 20 to 30 birth?
Well, people are less confident in the future than they were. I mean, people in the 50s, 60s were very confident in the future. Well, first of all, they planned to be with their employer until they retired. Yeah, there's a general, the future doesn't look as rosy. If you look at public opinion polls, a higher percentage of people are less optimistic about the future. Of course, we also had the blessing in those years is that we weren't bombarded 24/7 with news of how bad everything is.
I would agree.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
So, I mean, I think that all plays into it.
Sure. Second question is about housing. We talked a lot about new housing, but we're not seeing as much turnover in housing. As we talked about, Tom brought up and others about a lot more folks aging in place, people living longer. For those families who no longer have children at home, what effect has that had on where people who are maybe, Gen X, Boomer, silent generation, who are still living in their homes? Are you expecting in the next couple of decades a huge shift there where maybe some of those homes in a town like ours that maybe hasn't seen the same growth as other places where as those homes become available, that's an opportunity for us to bring more families in or potential families?
My experience is that the turnover is never as fast as we think it's going to be. And that most people, well, first of all, they've got so much stuff that the idea of moving is daunting. Okay. Secondly, most of them economically, it doesn't make sense. I'm going to sell my existing unit for $250,000 or maybe 200, and then something new is going to cost me $275. I don't want to take my cash savings. I don't want to take on a mortgage. I'll stay where I am because I can hire someone to clear the snow. I can hire someone to cut the grass. And if you've noticed, this is no longer done by neighborhood kids. These are now all businesses. I can hire somebody to come and help me clean the house once a month. So what we thought would happen, I say in the 80s, mid 80s, we thought there would be a turnover. We looked at there's going to be this turnover in housing. It's very slow. And most people don't leave until they, in essence, have to, which in the case of couples, one of the spouses dies, usually the male, and then the widow, uh, who's probably 85 or 87, she says, "Oh, this is a lot," and her children get very panicky. Say, "Oh, mom, you have to move." But before that, yeah. So that's the thing. It's a very slow process for the turnover.
Do anybody else comments, questions? Oh,
One other question. You had said once a community ages, it seldom gets young or something like that.
Once the population ages,
Once the population ages. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah.
What's the limitations?
well, once, because the age structure shifts on you, and so you can never get enough young people, or the perception we're not going to go back to having 7 kids. You have to have a lot of kids based off of a smaller number of people, and that's just not likely to happen. So you just get older and older. The thing that the other thing that is often said is that China will be the first nation to grow old before it grows rich.
All right, say again.
That China will be the first nation to grow old before it grows rich. See, we as in the United States grew rich before we grew old.
Interesting.
But if you grow old before you grow rich, you are always behind, because the cost of that non-working population is large.
Thank you.
thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Very thought-provoking, obviously great questions. Oh, Julie, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to thank you like we all did. Just so could listen to you all night long. I mean, just so much information and knowledge, and just appreciate you being here and doing the report. It's just so thorough, and you can read it and understand it so well. My question is, was there anything about Northfield, since you did our last demographic study in 2014, that surprised you when you did this most current study?
Not really. Not really.
I figured that's what you would say. It's really the same, right? It's just where we're at. So, but I did want to ask the question in case there was a little tidbit that you could share. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Very thought-provoking, great questions, good discussion. It's a lot of opportunity here for our district and our city to make some key decisions in the next few years. So thank you. Okay, our next item, I'm proud to report back to all of you on Dr. Hillman's mid-year evaluation. I have about a page and a half summary that I'd like to read you now with the details. So this report is for the period of July 1st, 2021 through the end of December 2021. For this period, all 7 board members completed the mid-year performance appraisal. The evaluation covers all facets of the superintendent's job responsibilities. Board members provide numeric ratings on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being low, 5 being high, for 48 job responsibilities organized around 8 major topics and 4 goals. In addition to completing the numeric ratings, board members provided additional comments in support of their rating. I compiled and summarized board members' evaluations for the numeric ratings. Means were calculated. All written comments were shared with Dr. Hillman verbatim, but were not attributed to a specific board member. And as board chair, I met with Dr. Hillman on January 19th, 2022 to review the mid-year appraisal. Dr. Hillman received an outstanding appraisal, achieving an overall rating of 4.92 out of 5. Board members provided numerous narrative comments that supported their ratings. Collectively, they cited his exceptional work in all areas. I will highlight the following 3: the 5-year strategic plan, the district mission and vision, and community relations. Dr. Hillman proposed a 5-year strategic plan to update the district plan from 2016. This new 5-year strategic plan encompasses a financial stewardship style which will prioritize key commitments or values and tie them to the district budget priorities. Dr. Hillman made an incredible effort to include as many stakeholders in as many venues as reasonably possible, culminating in an outstanding updated strategic plan. He facilitated Zoom sessions, met with Spanish-speaking parents, and even hosted a meeting outside one evening. His wit, wisdom, and wordsmithing got us a forward-looking, inclusive, strategic plan on time and achieved it during a pandemic, no less. Community members were given Dr. Hillman's full attention, and their questions, comments, and observations were thoughtfully considered. Dr. Hillman's strong ability to facilitate an open and honest discussion gave participants the knowledge that their comments were truly being heard and valued. His facilitation on the board work session was also outstanding, bringing the board input from many stakeholders. The new 5-year strategic plan will serve as the district's guiding principles for several years, and board members are grateful Dr. Hillman was able to help the community and board members focus on this important update. The district's mission and vision. Dr. Hillman is a strong leader with a strong vision for the Northfield School District. There's no better example of Dr. Hillman's commitment to the mission and vision of the district than his work over the past 6 months to bring us a new 5-year strategic plan. The outstanding process that led to the updated strategic plan served to re-energize and inspire all district stakeholders to recommit to the mission of preparing every student for lifelong success. What board members most value about Dr. Hillman is how our district's mission and vision drives the decisions he makes every hour of every day. This focus and commitment is on full display for all those who work with him as they are held accountable to these goals. This commitment has also resulted in a significant shift in the culture of the district that views its work through an equity lens. On community relations, more than anything now, schools are what bind the community together. Dr. Hillman is a personable, positive, knowledgeable person whose passion and commitment to public education shines through in every conversation. His warm and engaging personality and genuine love of having productive dialogues with anyone who wants to engage has rightfully earned him broad support within the community. Throughout the pandemic, he has been a source of information that is trusted by the community. His steady, calm disposition continues to guide us through the newest pandemic challenges. Dr. Hillman prides himself in communicating clearly and empathetically when responding to all stakeholders. He continues to put out district updates that are full of information and even has a regular presence at the local radio station, KYMN, to further explain the work of the district. Dr. Hillman is well connected to various groups of stakeholders. He's a member of the Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary Club. These organizations help Dr. Hillman network people and resources for the benefit of the entire community. Dr. Hillman worked with Northfield Promise and the City of Northfield to create Northfield Racial and Ethnic Equity Collaborative. Through the work of the collaboration, decision makers from the entire greater Northfield community gathered to address anti-racist work in town and committed to make lasting changes. Another indicator of Dr. Hillman's ability to engage the community is in his recent nomination for the Human Rights Award presented by the Human Rights Commission of the City of Northfield. He is known by local superintendents and has a great relationship with Chief Elliott and the staff at the Northfield Police Department. Leaders of the Minnesota Department of Education, Minnesota Department of Health, and Rice County Public Health know Dr. Hillman is someone who can advocate clearly for K-12 education. Community relations is his middle name. In closing, board members' high remarks and feedback speak to our full confidence in Dr. Hillman's leadership and ability to keep Northfield Public Schools moving towards a future full of hope and possibilities. Our district is lucky to have a kind, caring, and compassionate leader whose strong leadership benefits all. Congratulations.
I just want to thank the board for your ongoing positive and reinforcing feedback. I really take all of the feedback seriously, and you know that I'm dedicated to not only the school district, but the community, and just grateful for the team that I do the talking, they do the work. It's a good arrangement for me. So thanks to our team.
Thank you.
That was a joke, just to be clear.
Okay, I'm not sure if board members have additional comments to make or we can move on. Okay, the next item is Director of Finance, Val Murdoff, will report on school-wide fundraising.
Thank you. So this is my semi-annual report. You can see there were several fundraisers this fall for a variety of activities. The first two were actually on my previous report from May. They just were not finalized at that time. So I'm just bringing them back with the final sales and net profit for you to see. Those were for the music department and band. Most of these fundraisers are to raise funds for team gear, those sorts of things. Some have a few specific things, but a lot of bagging groceries and carrying banners at Jesse James Days. The Raider cross country had, I believe, their first 24-hour relay. That was a pretty big success for them. They ran around the middle school track for 24 hours. So not my cup of tea, but glad for them to do that. Coffee bags, Nordic Ski does that annually. And the rodeo cleanup is always a go-to one as well. So that is the summary of the ones that we've had since July 1st. And then again, those first two were just the finalization of the ones from the spring. But I will gladly answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Julie?
No questions, just a comment that we're grateful for the community that allows, our students the opportunities. And then, of course, when there's bagging and customers who always support them. So thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much for your report, Val.
You're welcome.
Right, let's see. Now, Dr. Hillman will present us the revised 2022-23 school calendar.
Yes, in your packet this evening, we're not asking for approval tonight, but what we are at is sharing an updated 2022-23 school calendar. The updates in the calendar are resulting from the negotiations recently completed with the Northfield Education Association. One of the pieces of learning that our teachers had during the pandemic was when we did shift between learning models, what were called pivot days, if you recall those, having a couple of days in between learning models, really reinforced with our teaching staff how valuable to slow down a little bit during the school year and have extra time to think and plan for the quarter ahead. So through the negotiation process, what we did is we took the 3 remaining days that were off calendars, 187 contract days. 3 of those had been off calendar, so you couldn't find them on the calendar, but they were counted as part of the total in recognition for the parent-teacher conference work that happens outside of the school day. We took those off calendar days and put them on the calendar, creating 2 days in between the first, second, and third quarter, what would traditionally been considered a grading day, and then adding a day for teachers again to be able to do planning and thinking and preparing for the next quarter. This is also going to spawn a long overdue discussion about the future of parent-teacher conferences and how we connect with parents. We have so many more communication tools now than we ever did when we had what is really now an outdated model. So we're looking at how do we have an ongoing conversation with parents rather than these arbitrary dates through the year in which people gather just to talk about progress and some other, that we think that those conversations should be more ongoing. So on this calendar, you should actually be able to count the 187 days. Because we had already adopted the calendar, we did some things to make sure that we protected the existing breaks and the graduation date and the end of the school year. So what we did is we moved the kickoff conferences or the family conferences that we've done over the last couple of years. We did move those just before Labor Day. So it's basically very similar calendar. You'll notice that there's an extra day for students off on in between the first, second, and third quarters. And we are pleased to have that negotiated item with the teachers because we really respect that learning that they had during the pandemic and during our first year of the pandemic about the benefit of having that time on the calendar, intentional, to make sure that they can be planning effectively for the following quarter. So those are the changes to that calendar. We are starting to prepare the 23-24 calendar, and you can anticipate seeing one of those in the next couple of months. This is just, again, a fairly modest adjustment to the 2022-23 calendar. To be clear, the start date of school is going to be the day after Labor Day. We're looking at the spring break being the same time as it was originally proposed, the winter break being the same exact time as it was originally proposed. The final school day, the final day of the school year on June 9th, 2023, and graduation remaining where it was on June 11th. So we were able to do those changes while just shuffling the deck chairs, if you will, within the school year itself.
And questions, comments? Amy?
So when you're preparing the next academic year calendar, are you looking at moving those family conferences after Labor Day again, or will you keep them before Labor Day?
Well, we'll be discussing that as part of that process and looking at making sure that we see the continued need for those family conferences. Remember, those were born out of making sure that we had that intentional touch point at the beginning of the year, but we want to make sure that we're recommitted to them and that people find them valuable. That'll be part of our discussion. And so, yes, it's possible that they could move again after Labor Day. It's also possible that they could stay before the beginning of the school year. And when we go back to when we used to do Ready, Set, Go Day, if you recall, which was before the start of the school year, we at the elementary level, we had a very, very high percentage of parents who participated.
Anyone else? Comment, question? Very good. Next, we have 4 policies before us: policy 503, 515, 524.2, and 534. These policies have been revised to reflect federal and state statutory changes. Dr. Hillman, do you want to make any comments?
First reading of these policies, and so please feel free as you start to take a look at them if you have any questions for consideration. Again, these are largely statutory changes, if not exclusively.
Julie?
So we're taking it policy by policy, correct? We just want to talk about 503 right now.
You could
Or-
jump around,
okay.
it's fine.
So we're on policy 503, which is the attendance. On page 4, the habitual truant. So it talks about a student 17 years of age who is absent from attendance without lawful excuse. So lawful excuse means the parent is calling in an excuse for that child.
Yeah, so Julie, there is I think there's a list, or we have a set of attendance criteria that I'm trying to remember if it's in this particular policy or if it's part of the student citizenship handbook. There are some reasons for attendant or for not attending that are not lawful. I can't enumerate them for you right here.
I was just wondering, yeah, if a parent just decides, we're going to continue to always be on vacation and not necessarily, I guess my question was, if it falls within a parameter of lawful excuse, that's accepted, but if those are there's ever occasions where a parent's excuse has to be challenged in terms of their student being out.
So yes, if we were to see, one of the things we could see, let's just give an example. I'll use an example of something where we could see what we would think about being excessive medical components, where we just are seeing a called in ill frequently. Typically what you're going to do is we're going to be intervening with that prior ever to getting to the habitual truant component. But there are some very rare circumstances where we might see requiring some kind of physician's assessment or talking, getting those kinds of things from families. I think the key thing is that this is a collaborative process. Before we get to being a habitual truant, there's a number of different places where people have attempted to intervene. Remember that the change in this policy and that part is directly attributed to the new law. And so that definition of a habitual truant, which you'll see includes the law. And I will have the list for the next meeting before we vote. We'll have the list of any unlawful excuses for you so that you're able to see that. I think the key thing is that There could be circumstances where a parent might want it excused where we may not have it excused.
Okay, and then how often is habitual truancy become an issue or an issue for students in the district?
So I think we've had a remarkable piece of being able to intervene before a person becomes a habitual truant. Though I will tell you that attendance has been turned on its head in the state with the beginning of the pandemic. So we actually have been having a number of discussions administratively about the future of the attendance policy and thinking more broadly down the line of what does constitute attendance. We still live in a state where attendance is only counted if you are in the seat in the school. And I think that we are learning, right, or we know, but we are learning how we can apply alternate or other methodologies of students learning that don't necessarily align with that, 6 rows across, 5 rows deep. You have to be here, the seat time component. So I would anticipate this is the bulk of the changes here are statutory. But I think you can expect in the next year to see another attendance policy recommendation that will reflect what we have learned and how we plan to move forward, leveraging a number of different learning opportunities. I think one of the cases is just to take a look at the attendance policy, the attendance practice in Portage. It's very clear that it says you need to attend 5 of 7 days, right, within their own. And that's because part of the Portage program is to have some flexibility. So if I would prefer to do my work on a Saturday in Portage, well, that's fine, right? I mean, that's the whole point of, and so I think that's an example of how we're going to see some of the attendance approach changing. It's very important to be in school, but what being in school is that definition is changing as well.
Great, thank you.
Good question.
In 524, the use of technology.
Yes.
So it would be part 3, number 6, the new edition.
Yes.
It starts out saying the school district has a special interest in regulating off-campus speech. That caught my attention. Maybe I'm not understanding it, but what's the impetus or the point and the parameters around this?
So Tom, this goes to what we've long referred to as a nexus of off-campus behavior or off-campus speech that spills over into the school. So if I am someone who is using, and if you really, some of it is around the cyberbullying component, right? So if I can be disciplined, discipline can occur even if something necessary took place outside of school, if that particular incident spills over and materially disrupts a student's ability to be able to effectively learn. So my sense of this particular piece is being updated from some of the most recent court cases that have been landmark cases that are being decided around how external student speech can impact the school day. We know that there have been some limits that have been placed on what a school can do for discipline of students when that speech takes place outside of school. But what has been clear is when it does spill over into the school environment, creates a nexus where there is a material disruption of the school day or of a student's educational opportunity, that we have an opportunity to intervene. So that new section, again, this is a statutory piece, tries to outline that there are times when a school is able to step in if that off-campus speech has a direct impact within the school environment.
Okay, I guess that's what I thought. Maybe I just didn't read it clearly enough, but is it so clear that that this only applies during school hours, or if that 3:15 on a weekday, it wouldn't be, since there'd be no school going on, it wouldn't matter what kids then do on their computers at home or what kind of speech, or what, even necessarily if they were bullying someone else on their own time. This is only in effect during school hours.
Well, and also, but it would also go, Tom, to school district owned devices.
Right, yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I would argue that this change is focused on those kinds of, if you continue to look at it, talks about things about unacceptable use originating from a non-school district computer that we can try to investigate if it's through our account, if that makes sense.
Right.
I think it would also go to that if we're using our equipment or our accounts to harass other people. It could be where if we're trying to from off campus, if I'm off campus, I am trying to evade the school district security pieces. Even if those things happen outside of campus, they're still being done with our equipment and our accounts, and that allows us to be able to intervene there.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah, the first, I understand that, I understand, but I think as you get further into it, you see that that first part is really about making sure that we have the ability to work with things that have a material disruption of the school. And then as you keep looking at it, it's more about using school district equipment or accounts or trying to nefariously gain access to those.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I had another question on the one pertaining to school meals. I was just curious, in any given year, about how much money is owed at the end of the year, but that people got behind on. Any idea?
It ranges. I would say if I had to pick an average, 8,000-ish is probably the range. I think at our highest during the pandemic, it was like right prior to the pandemic, before we switched over to free breakfast and lunch, it was closer to 12 or 15, I want to say. But I know that the Child Nutrition Department has worked really hard over the pandemic while they do have access to free meals to really try and help families get on top of that. So.
And if you recall, we received a gift from Post 2 years ago, just before the pandemic started. And would you want to talk about how we use some of that in December?
We're working on it.
We're working on that as well. Just, okay,
Yes.
explain what we're looking at doing there.
Yep. So we are looking, Post gave us a significant donation that went directly to what we call our angel fund. So each building, or each site has an angel fund where people can donate, and it covers meals for students in need or visitors if they needed it, that sort of thing. And so we are looking at the possibility of being able to basically pay off all of our negative balances over $25, so that if we do revert back to paid meals, free and reduced meals, that the kind of pre-pandemic status, that everybody could start with a fresh slate.
And then you talk about the district using the collection agency. I assume they come with a cost also. And would it cost us more to hire a collection agency to go after people for money because they can't buy food, which, 1 year was free and now isn't anymore? I mean,
So we do contract with an agency, and they actually take a percentage of anything they collect. So we don't pay a monthly fee per account or anything like that. It's only if they collect funds, then we get 60% of what they collected, and they keep 40 once it gets to a certain point. Prior to that, they also manage our non-sufficient funds process. So they reach out to those families and do all of that. When I very first started in the district, we did a lot of that in-house, and it's very time consuming to keep on top of. It's multiple communications and tracking, and they have an effective system. And it really, it is actually more cost effective for the district because they get better results. They have more tools than we do. I think that we're obviously sensitive to what we send. Like, we're not just, we have a process in place to make sure that the accounts that we're sending do in fact need to be in that stage, but we do certainly reach out internally first before we get to that process. But it's more than just that. They do manage the NSF and a few other things for us.
Thank you.
Yep.
Corey.
I'll just back up Bale a little bit. As a father of a milk enthusiast, which we still have to pay for milk as parents. I got a notification last week because we were 1750 in the hole on milk. So it was very thoughtful language that was used in the notice. So when they're in through $50 in, so I'm probably good through April, but I'll try to stay off that list for the rest of the year.
Julie.
I have a question back on policy 524.2. So under parents, it's the last section for parents' responsibility, notification of student internet use. It said, parents have the right at any time to investigate or review the content of their child's files and emails according with the school district's protection and privacy of pupil records policy. So child in that case is a student under the age of 18.
That is correct.
Thank you. That was my only question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I had some questions too on the attendance policy. Let's see, letter C number 2, a child and parent are referred to the appropriate services. It doesn't distinguish between, say, a child in elementary, middle school with a high truancies and a high schooler, I imagine. But even then, a high schooler is still a minor, and so it's the child named or referred. And yet in elementary, what I'm getting at is they're truant because their grown-up is not getting them to school, whereas 16, 17-year-old may be the reason that they're truant is they themselves are not getting to school.
Right, that is very true. The statute does not distinguish.
Mm.
It's everyone under 17. And so that's the part of trying to align with the statute component. I do agree that the way that we look at those kinds of different differentiation between a second grader and a 16-year-old are very different.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're different in some ways, but they are very similar in others. It is a team approach, right? We have a number of helping professionals who try to intervene. So at the elementary schools, you'll often see our social workers working directly with the family. As we get to the secondary, you're seeing more counselors being involved as well as social workers. And then in some cases, it is a chemical issue, which our chemical dependency counselor may be involved with as well. So that team approach, those teams have bought kids alarm clocks over the years and, things like that. So while it is everyone under 17 is classified under that same piece under the statute, and you have a different approach if I'm a first grader versus if I'm a 16-year-old, it has some similarity in the attempting to support families to make sure the kids are here.
Okay. And so do you think that type of language is not really necessary because it gets into procedure more than policy?
In this particular one, we can certainly take a look at the language. However, I do get a little reticent to change it because this is in alignment with the latest state statute, and MSBA has given us the most defendable language if needed. We can certainly take a look at if there's a way to modify it. But there are parts of the MSBA updates that we get a little concerned about making changes because they have had their lawyers review it to make sure that we're in alignment with the statute.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, policy 515, letter I, and the definition of who is a parent, and there's language in there that says an individual acting as a parent of the student. It leaves it quite open, I think. So in what case is an individual acting as a parent? In what case will that person then be considered a parent? For example, the person that I call the school and say they'll pick up my kid, are they now able to?
Sure. So the second part of that sentence is an individual acting as a parent of the student in the absence of a parent or guardian. And so in that case, there are certain times where we have to have specific written permission for that person to act. One example could be, let's say that there is a student, and this is a little beyond this particular definition, but there are people who do have the authority to be an emergency contact, right? And in that case, there's a form to fill out. And so that person in certain circumstances has the ability to be in that particular way. In some other cases, if we have, for example, in an IEP meeting, an individual, sometimes a parent may designate someone else. It could be a step parent, right? It could be someone else who has written explicit permission to act on behalf of the parent. So there's just a couple of examples where I would see.
I think that helps. And then lastly, on the policy on meals, sorry, I lost the number on that. Is it
534.
534? In the first section, it says minimize the, okay, I wonder if I should pull it up. Minimize who knows. Let's see if I can find it. Minimize the identification of students with insufficient funds. And again, I understand we're trying to align with the most defensible language. And so if that's the case here, okay, but I was wondering if that might need something about minimize it to just that district staff that needs to know. I don't know that the cashier even needs to know that the child has a balance.
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction. That is not something that's been changed to align with the statute. That is old law, or that is old language, I should say. And I think the term minimize is intended to say the least number of people who are, but you are suggesting, saying minimizing that to truly only the people who not just but have a need to know.
Yeah.
And who are those people who have a need to know? I do think that the cashiers will know. And the reason is that the way the system works is that often it will always show how much is remaining in the account,
Yeah.
because they do serve as a point of presence where a student may ask, how much do I have left in my, and so that is part of the system. The real intent of that is, and for a long time, we have not done the things, Northfield schools have not done the kinds of things that
Right.
prompted these legal changes, dumping trays and, you know, we've long gotten rid of tickets or stamps, you know, or things like that. We've been using our notification system since just around when I came to the district 12 years ago. So there's been an attempt over time to really minimize, and I think the use of that term minimize is intended just to the people who need to know. And really it comes down to that it is the cashier is going to know because they're going to have the screen. They see that on the system. But other than that, it's a very limited number of people who, so we can certainly explain further what that minimize identification. I think the intent of that is to guard against the hand stamps, the
Yep.
tickets that people used to get, those kinds of things.
Comments even.
Correct. And I think our people Stephanie Strummy
Yeah.
does an excellent job of training our cashiers, and that's reviewed regularly to ensure that, you know, we just demand that we provide our students with dignity if they are in a circumstance where they do not have the sufficient funds. And there's a number of safeguards in place to make sure that that happens, but it comes back to training. And we believe that our training is incredibly effective, but a modest language change there is something that we could potentially do just to even further clarify it.
Okay.
So we'll just take a note of trying to find something with the word minimize, adding something there.
Just two more items. One is what is a reimbursable meal? And then the other is, seems like from letter D forward under section 2, is redundant to what is being described in letter I, the purpose.
Okay, so I lost that second. I was looking at so tell me that second one.
So what is a reimbursable meal? And then in letter D, under section 2, it seems from letter D forward, those items were described under purpose, or not under purpose. They were described in letter A. Just, it seems like there's some, like they're redundant.
Okay, so let's start with what a reimbursable meal is. So a reimbursable meal, I'll have Val help me with this. It's a very specific combination of food items that is dictated by USDA of what counts as a reimbursable meal. So we serve a certain sequence or a combination really of food items that then equal what's a reimbursable meal, which means the USDA gives us a certain amount of dollars per each of those meals that we serve. Val, do you know off the top of your head? It's about having a grain and vegetable and milk as part of that. Why don't you take that, Val?
Yep. So basically, if you go through school lunch, whatever the lines are that they have will be set up as a reimbursable meal. So the salad bar includes, a roll. You have to take a milk and 2 fruits, or So all of those are set up specifically to be reimbursable. That's how the program is funded. And they also have things like à la carte for kids who aren't interested in that. And so those are not reimbursable because they don't meet all of the federal guidelines that were required to meet all those, nutritional targets. So that's kind of the definition. So every time a student takes one of those meals, it's logged as such, and then we report that every month to MDE, and then we get our funding based on the number of reimbursable meals that we served by building. Does that make sense?
Yep, that's helpful. So on the second, for example, look at payment of meals, letter A, and then there's a sentence about a student shall not be allowed to purchase à la carte items until the negative account balance is paid. And then that same sentence is also letter D.
Got it. Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, from D forward, it seems like some of those items appeared in letter A.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll review that segment, and we sometimes will try to use the bulleted points just to make them more apparent to people.
Okay.
But we can look at that to see if the duplicate is necessary. Sometimes duplication is necessary.
Okay,
We just don't like duplication, but sometimes it's required.
okay. All right, any other comments or questions? Very good.
Good work.
All right. We're on to letter G. Dr. Helen, would you like to give us your superintendent operations and COVID-19 update?
I would be happy to. So you know the typical pattern in which I share with you this information. So I have included the latest graph that was published on Thursday from Rice County Public Health. There's such a backlog of cases right now that there was over nearly 150 cases added to the January 2nd through January 8th. So I did call there to say, is 920 the right number for 2 weeks in a row? And they said, yep, we triple checked it. But just that is what you're seeing in the backlog of cases right now due to processing issues and frankly, just the volume that we've had. Want to share with you that I want you to let this sink in for one moment. On this morning's dashboard, we had nearly a 50 case reduction. So almost 50 cases came off the dashboard today, roughly. We still sit today at 268 cases reported in the last 14 days. That is more cases than the entire school district reported for the entire 2020-21 school year. And we had a significant decrease today. I think the data speaks for itself with that. And so I just shared that in the data is changed, right? The way that we are trying to continue to use the data methodology that we used at the beginning of the pandemic. And there are some experts who are really talking about Omicron as a different pandemic, if you will, in some way, shape, or forms. But that is a very sobering thought to me, just about that 268 cases on our dashboard today compared to 263 all of last year. So I think that that is just an important point of reflection. I shared with you the total number of cases in the last 14 days, and we're going to try to update the dashboard to start giving a report of the last 7 days as well. We just haven't been able to make it look very good yet. So we're working on that. We'll start asking Nuger to help us with that. Shared with you a little bit about the ILI rates. And again, shared with you that the ILI rates are viewed differently in talking with public health and epidemiology. It's very clear that the influenza-like illness rate is a great tool or a great piece of data for us to be able to take a look at for influenza outbreaks. But Omicron is not influenza, right? So we are seeing percentages of ILI at schools that is routinely above 5%. In one case, we had a school that averaged above 10%. We've talked with public health multiple times, and it is just not apples to apples in this case. So that is a metric that we have typically used that just in this particular context, we are looking at, it's only one piece of data and it's used in conjunction with a number of other pieces of data. So it is, I can understand how that might be confusing to some people. You look at it, hey, we've always talked about 5% ILI, but it is just a little bit different in this particular and it will come back to being something that a piece of data that it was intended to be about trying to minimize outbreaks specific to influenza. And we hope that COVID-19 becomes that kind of thing in the future. Wanted to share that, as we mentioned before, that we are using a cascading approach to staffing. So we are committed to in-person, uninterrupted in-person learning for as long as we're able to effectively staff our schools. We use a cascading approach. So we use all of our regular substitutes. We assign our 3 full-time substitutes. We have been reassigning district office and instructional services staff to substitute teach as needed. And then we would also we have not had to do a ton of this yet, but we have had to do some of it where we may have to reassign teachers who typically work with small groups of students to cover general education classrooms. Our primary focus is on those elementary general education classrooms. We have some strategies in place at the middle school and high school that allow greater flexibility in terms of covering uncovered absences by people sometimes filling in on their prep period, of course, which they're paid for. The high school has what I think is an ingenious approach of how they've assigned people to supervise a study hall, but they don't have to supervise it every day. So they're able then to help with covering a person who might be out who we didn't have a sub for. And so far, it is working. It is not great. It's not awesome. It is not even good, but we are making it work to try to get through these next couple of weeks for what experts are telling us of this bump in Omicron, which should come down as quickly as it went up, is what we are being told. And we are seeing some of that in some of our early data. Spring Creek Elementary is where we saw our largest increase right out of the gate after winter break. And we are starting to see that it's following exactly the arc that experts have said it would follow. And so we are hopeful that that is a harbinger for other buildings as well. We continue to make sure that we have all of the resources to weather this particular variant. So we now we will have received a total of just under 70,000 KN95 masks to give to staff and students. Clearly a higher quality mask. That's something that we know that can help prevent the spread of transmission. We continue to be very proud of what I think may be a state leading testing approach, which just we've talked about it a number of times, the whole host of different testing opportunities we have. We've completed over 1,200, get that, 1,200 rapid molecular or PCR equivalent tests at our drive-through Q testing center. We've expanded some of that capacity a little bit, not in terms of the number of times, but in terms of the staff to be able to help run that. We have an inventory of around 10,000 rapid antigen test kits, and that is a huge advantage to us. It has allowed us to launch the Test to Stay program, which I've talked to several buildings. It's a little clunky the first couple of days as you get the procedure down. But I was at Greenvale Park today, and what I would say is the office staff at Greenvale Park continue to share their gratitude that we had moved in the Test to Stay, because for families who may have had to have quarantined, this gives them an option to be able to keep coming to school without being interrupted by being able to test on round day 2 or day 5. We have picked up a few students who were close contacts who have tested positive. So that again is helping break that chain of transmission. So I am very proud of the testing that we have done. And then of course, as you know, we have updated our district protocols. They're rooted in the latest MDH and CDC guidance. And we've reduced our quarantines in most cases to 5 days, allowing people to come back after with a negative antigen test. Of course, we are more complicated in some ways and simpler in other ways about how we handle positive cases, close contacts. And again, the Test to Stay program, really, if you're unvaccinated or haven't had COVID in the last 90 days and you're still a close contact, you're able to come back, you're able to stay in school without having to quarantine if you agreed to test twice during what would have been the quarantine period. So all of these advances to, again, pursuing our goal, which we've said from the beginning, which is uninterrupted in-person student learning. A couple of other areas that I want to highlight. We are going to say this many, many times. AA+. It is outstanding. This is an external validation of the school district's excellent financial management. We have some real challenges, as you saw. You cannot outrun 30 years of chronic underfunding of schools by the state legislature and declining enrollment. But if there's anybody who can weather that storm, it is us, because we have an excellent financial management system led by Director of Finance, Val Murderstorff. Again, only 3 school districts in the state have a better bond rating than we do, and only 2 are our peers. And this is an external validation by what would be widely considered one of the most respected financial analyst companies in the world, Standard & Poor's. As we start to work into the priority-based budget process, I'd like to point out that we are offering the community, we've shared it now twice with parents. It's been on our social media. We'll announce it again tomorrow on KYMN as I go for my radio show. We're doing a School Finance 101 webinar tomorrow night for families at 6:30 p.m. Deb Griffiths from Schools for Equity Education will be doing an overview of state funding. Northfield is, of course, one of 54 member C districts, and C advocates for fair systems of funding for schools regardless of their property wealth. We will be offering live Spanish interpretation for this, so using the Zoom live interpretation feature. So Spanish-speaking families will be able to hear the presentation, and then we'll have a live translation as well for people in that. And it's a very effective use of that Zoom, the Spanish Zoom room is what we would call it. So we want to make sure that as many people from our community who would like to participate can. I encourage our district youth council students to log on as well and learn about school finance. So that is my report this evening.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Amy?
Thank you for the update. I'm curious about staff vacancies. Do you have any sense of what percentage of staff vacancies we have? Or last time you said there was 30 EA open spots on the day of our last meeting. So just wondering if you had any numbers behind it. And if you could also talk about bus drivers and if they're being affected as well.
Yeah, so we'll start with bus drivers because of course we contract our bus services to Benjamin Bus. And this wood, we're gonna knock on this wood because I talked with John Benjamin, the owner of the company, about a week ago, and he felt they were in good shape. At that point, they have 6 people who are in their office who can become substitute bus drivers, and that they had not been using any of them at that point. Of course, we all know that can turn around, so we're gonna knock on wood to not create any unintended issues there by tempting fate. Today, we had a total of 79 absences in the district, and we had a fill rate of 66.7%, if you want to be very specific. Now, of course, there are some positions that don't need to be filled, right, in terms of people who don't get a substitute. We still see the bulk of our, today was a good day comparatively. And so we did not have any, according to the report that I'm looking at, we did not have any uncovered general education classes at the elementary or the secondary. We did have some specialist pieces that went unfilled where, give you an example, we have 2 Phi-Ed teachers at each elementary building. If one of them is gone, they team teach, the one remaining will take both classes. If there's another adult that we can move into that room to support, there's compensation for that teacher. We had 2 of those circumstances today. And we also had a couple of English learner teachers who were out that we were not able to cover them with a substitute. Today was one of the best days that we've had in some time. So that is a fairly reasonable, well, this was a very good day. So if we go back and I can take a look, let's take a look. Fridays are always a tough day. Normally, in terms of just, we see some greater absences on Fridays. And when we look at last Friday, again, we had 101 total absences on Friday. Now remember, when we say this, this is a combination of all things that people need to do, right? We have some people who are sick. We have some people whose kids' daycare closed because of COVID. We have people who have taken personal leave to do an appointment or things. These are all legitimate kinds of things, right? But we had 101 absences on Friday with a fill rate of 69.5%. And again, we did have some very limited spots where there were some uncovered classrooms. And in that case, that means then the building will shift some resources within. So you could see a person who typically would work with a small group of students go and cover a full classroom or a general education classroom for the day. So what my characterization of this is, it is not awesome. It is not what we prefer, but we still have existing capacity. We are not using all of our capacity yet to cover absences.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing those numbers because that's quick math is 10 to 15% of the staff is gone on any given day. And that's really substantial. And the fact that you can keep in-person learning going and cover most of those areas, I just want to thank everyone who's been pitching in to make that happen for our students.
The buildings are doing a heavy lift. It is difficult. I mean, it really is. And we are certainly, there are times where we're having to choose between which services can we offer that day. But what we think and what our experience tells us is the more that we can prioritize that uninterrupted in-person learning, that collective uninterrupted in-person learning, that's good for the vast majority of our kids. And our staff, their commitment to public service is exemplary, because the reports that I get from building principals is that people know that they may need someone else to help cover for them at some point, and that people are really stepping forward. Now, there's compensation, right? And so that's just fair to do. So driven by our contracts, and we're very grateful for people stepping up. And so it really is a team effort, and people are really, really working hard to keep this thing going. And it is difficult, just like the rest of society. You read all the stuff about how difficult it is in nearly every field right now. And I've said this to our team, we are in the middle of the crucible right now, and it is not easy, but we are committed to doing this. We'll do everything that we reasonably can to keep it going. And it's really a result of people who are willing to do a pretty heavy lift to make it happen. And people are, I mean, they're getting hit from everywhere, right? I mean, it's not just that they're sick. It could be that they have a child who is sick, or we've had several daycares who have had just to close up entirely because of some cases that they've had there. So, people are just getting hit from all sorts of angles, just things that are beyond most people's control.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Back in the day when I went to school, decades ago, study hall was in the auditorium, and it was more or less a free-for-all, but not entirely. I mean, we did do our homework there, but it was supervised by someone who probably was unlicensed in anything other than to supervise a study hall. Now, I don't know what the structure is in the high school study hall, but if it's just a room that students go to have access to a teacher to ask questions, could that be maybe throttled back a little bit and just have someone who's maybe not as certified in that position to supervise a study hall, or for that matter, combine them and put them in the auditorium? And that would free up licensed teachers to do other things, compensated and within the contract and all, but
Yeah, so just got to start off with that. We are actually doing very similar things to what you're suggesting, Tom. We're using the upper cafeteria though, as opposed to the auditorium. It's just for many periods during the day. Of course, when it's lunchtime, it's more difficult to do. Study halls take on a variety of different things. We have some structured study halls where it's smaller and very intentional to help students with work because they need some additional adult assistance just for organization or things like that. But we have several of the large kinds of study halls that you have. And I would say that Dr. Lear, the high school principals, has a very innovative approach where typically we might have had 3 or 4 classrooms that were having a study hall. By consolidating them in the upper cafeteria. And then what happens is those 3 or 4 people who are assigned to the study hall rotate through being the one person to supervise it. Then those remaining people, if there's a substitute need during those class periods, are assigned to another class to substitute teach. And then if there isn't the need, they get some additional prep time, which is part of the compensation for their flexibility, if that makes sense. So we're not doing the auditorium, and I want to be really, it isn't a free-for-all. It's actually quite organized.
Good. I have a question about maybe you could talk briefly about when an EA position is not filled and that EA is tied to an education plan or even the EL services. What happens in that situation?
That's a difficult question to answer because that is our biggest area where we're not filling positions. So what happens is there's an attempt to have other educational assistants cover some of those students if possible. You heard Director of Special Service of Students Special Services, Cheryl Hall, talk about recovery services. And that is going to be something we're going to be dealing with for the next several years, the recovery services for special education students based on some of the disruption to their services during the pandemic. So I think that gets worked into that as well. And just sometimes the services aren't rendered in as timely of a fashion as we would like, but it's the reality that we're dealing with. We're doing everything that we can, but you can only use the people that you have.
Right. Thank you.
So I'd put another plug in for anybody watching the board meeting. We have immediate openings in our substitute pool, and we recently raised our rates for both our classroom. If you have a 4-year degree and you'd like to get a short call substitute license, you could do that through the Minnesota Department of Education. We're now paying $200 a day for teacher substitutes, and I think we're up to $16.92 an hour for most of our hourly substitutes, something around that. So apply online at northfieldschools.org today.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're moving on to committee reports. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess when you get into the consent agreement, with this draft you've got here, is this the policy that, we're voting on today? Is that a roll call vote or not? So you're taking this consent agreement, so this draft that has the safety protocols.
Just the exit strategy we're talking about.
Right.
No, I don't.
So it's not etched in stone then?
No, we're going to ask you to vote on it tonight. It wouldn't be a roll call vote. It's not a resolution.
But if we vote, however we vote, then this is what you're saying is your conditions for,
Right, until we were to change it again,
right?
if that were to be necessary.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that separately later, Jeff, as
Okay.
part of the items for individual action.
All
So
right.
that's why it wasn't part of my report right now.
Good question. Okay, committee reports, and Julie's gonna talk about the Legislative Action Committee.
Okay, excellent. I just want to provide an update to the Legislative Action Committee, which we formalized as a board last year in January of 2021. And the initial membership was Corey Butler, Claudia Gonzalez George, Dr. Hillman, and myself. This year, it was our goal to roll out our membership to a broader group of stakeholders. And so we got to work on that right away in late December and had a first meeting with those that we had invited to a Zoom meeting in early January to talk about their involvement with the committee and the way that we can more effectively advocate if we have a larger group of membership at our Legislative Action Committee. Again, our goal there is to engage with state lawmakers in a nonpartisan, positive, fact-based approach for legislation that supports E12 public education with a focus on legislation that will impact Northfield Public Schools. So as we know today, the 1 week from today, the legislative session for 2022 begins on January 31st. It is scheduled to end on May 23rd, 2022. Some interesting dynamics to the legislative session. The budget for the biennium is set, so typically sessions in even number of years focus on the state bonding bill. However, I think it's been broadly reported and most know that there is a $7.75 billion projected surplus. So there's some real money there to work with. Our legislators are in their own situation where every legislator, including the governor, is up for reelection in November of 2022. So that will certainly add to the dynamics, as well as our legislature is charged with redistricting, redrawing boundaries of election districts as a result of the 2020 census. So our legislators have until February 15th to approve the redrawing of districts. There's not likelihood is a consensus that they will actually be able to do that. So it is likely it will go to the Minnesota State Supreme Court to approve the redistricting. That does have to get done in time to for the midterm elections in November of 2022. So with all legislators up for reelection, including the governor, $7.7 billion projected surplus, new districts being redrawn or new election districts that legislators will have to look at in terms of their own reelection. So it should be a very interesting session. So we have a Legislative Action Committee that we think is really primed and ready to help us advocate for issues that we know are important to how well we are able to provide a quality education for our students. So our initial meetings with the district stakeholders include parents, 2 students from the district youth council, community members. We have between 12 and 15 who we think will really remain quite engaged. And our goal is to really be able to reach out and advocate with our legislators through email, one-on-one conversations, and hopefully some one-on-one meetings with the Legislative Action Committee to really help them to understand the impact of the laws and how we can advocate for the passage of them, or in some cases, some important modifications. To that end, of course, everyone needs to understand school funding, which is a complex issue. And Dr. Hillman alluded to that or spoke about the presentation tomorrow night. So we're really excited that Deb Griffiths from C is willing to do the webinar. I have seen Deb do this presentation, and she really is able to quite effectively explain school funding and how it works. And it's complex, but she's really able to explain it in a very clear and concise way, and then really also articulate the challenges to how school funding is approached. So we hope that our community can view the webinar. It will be recorded, and we will use it, as a district quite broadly moving forward to help people really understand that. So again, we're just starting the session a week from today, and it should be very interesting. So we look forward to the Legislative Action Committee keeping the board updated on our work. So if there's any questions, otherwise we can move on.
Thank you, Julie. Any
Thank you.
questions, comments? Yeah, Amy.
Is there going to be a day at the Capitol this year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amy. So at this point, C is envisioning that being virtual. So we will definitely keep board members. We do have a date. I believe it's March. Well, we can let you know the date. I believe it's in early March that we will have the day to meet with our legislators. I have it on my phone. I can look it up. But yes, I know you have been involved in the past with it, Amy, and we had district youth council students that were involved as well. And it was just really it's always a great opportunity for us to meet one-on-one with our legislators. I've also been speaking with Deb Griffiths, and she said that really as a Legislative Action Committee and for others who want to join, that we can request time with Education Committee chairs and ask for some one-on-one time meeting with the decision makers at the chair level of some of these key committees as well, in addition to obviously our local legislators. So thank you for asking about that. We will definitely keep you posted. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you,
Thank you.
Julie. You're a wealth of information and passion on the committee. I'm so grateful for you, and I can't wait to see what this year brings with the expanded committee. All right, we're moving on to the consent agenda. As a reminder, there were some items in the table file. If there's anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping, is there anything anybody would like to pull for separate consideration? Is there? Mhm.
COVID policy.
It's not in the consent grouping.
Okay.
Chair.
Oh, right. Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping?
I got approved.
Jeff, moved by Jeff, seconded by Amy. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay, we have a resolution tonight regarding the middle school roof. This is the resolution, so there will be a roll call vote. Is there a motion to approve the resolution relating to $3,120,000 general obligation facilities maintenance bond series 220222A? Sorry. Authorizing issuance, awarding sale, and prescribing the form and details, and providing for the payment thereof. By Amy, second by Julie. Okay, we heard Val Murdesdorf present on this at our last meeting. Also, Shelby presented. If there are any questions, Val, I think Shelby's gone. So if there are any questions or comments, Val can help us out. None? All right, seeing none, we have a motion and a second, and Anita will conduct a roll call vote.
Broniak,
Aye.
Butler,
Aye.
Gerwitz,
Aye.
Gonzalez George,
Aye.
Pritchard,
Aye.
Quinnell,
Aye.
Stratmoen,
All right, motion passes. We have policy 460, remote work. We'll be voting on this policy tonight. The first reading was on January 10th. Do we have a motion to approve policy 460, remote work? Moved by Julie, second by Corey. All right, this is our second read. Any comments or questions? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Policy 491, I'm sorry, policy 460, remote work passes. Okay, next we will be voting on the COVID-19 safety protocols exit criteria 2021-22. Is there a motion to approve COVID-19 safety protocols exit criteria 2021-22?
Discussion.
We will have discussion on this. Okay, moved by Tom, second by Julie. This is our second read. If we have any questions or comments, we can do that now.
Yeah,
Jeff, go ahead.
I'm going to be a no on this for a few different reasons. One, programs for preschool, kindergartens to continue. I'm totally against, the masks on the really young kids. I just don't like that at all. To me, it gets, one of the things in being on a board, for over 10 years, we used to be really good at. I got 332 school districts, and I'm kind of calling this the Northfield bubble. It's kind of like with COVID and all of this, what we're doing here. I really like to look at all 332 school districts, everyone in the, what's their COVID policy from the metro to here, whatever. And I just feel that this is just, there's too many conditions in here. I just don't, I think it's a move in the right direction. And I'm going to vote no because there's some things that I don't like, and I think it's a little bit clumsy. I'm happy that we're moving in the right direction and it'll probably get approved, but that isn't the way that I would structure it. So I guess those are my comments.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments or questions? Corey. I'm sorry. Corey and then Julie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
Dr. Hillman, last time this was presented, I think you said student immunization rate was around 58 or 59%. Do you have an update on what that number might be today?
Yeah, I do. And just to recall too, this is the third time that we've looked at this because we brought this forward in December. So the latest vaccination rate statistic that I have is K-12 around 57%. Remember that we have an immunity rate. This is not just the vaccine. So the vaccination rate is around 57%. And then when we look at the infection rate, I'm still working on sorting out a handful of pieces there, but it appears that when we add the infections in, we're most likely somewhere between 75 and 78% on the immunity rate. So that's the immunization rate, or the vaccination rate plus the number of infections. And so with the chart, you see that we're getting fairly close to being at the top of having a higher amount of cases per 100,000 residents over a 7-day period. For context, the current number is 1,629 per 100,000. So we're some ways from this, but I do think it's important in the depths of this really dark time with Omicron that we have some hope, for the future, that as it declines just as quickly as it went up, as experts are saying, this is a very reasonable in terms of and very doable exit strategy.
And as we know, the number changes daily for the
Does.
county rate. In the last 6 months, do you recall what the low point has been for that number?
It would be below what our criteria would be last summer for sure.
Thank you.
All right, Julie, did you have a question? A comment?
No, Corey's asked the question that I had. I also wondered then if, for this exit protocol, if there would continue to be contact tracing.
Yeah, I would say that that's a good question. And what I would say is that no, I think that when we remove the protocols, the intention was that when the protocols are removed, the protocols are removed because we would be seeing low enough transmission rate where we would not need to have those kinds of continued services.
Then my other last question is, we talk about the MDH decision tree. Have they updated that yet?
So in the table file, there was an updated version.
Oh, I'm
that-
sorry,
yep,
that's right. I'm looking at the wrong one.
Yep, and it
Because I
just
knew, okay. Yep,
talks
yep,
about
yep.
that we'll use the district's protocols, which we have recently updated. The decision tree is really essentially going away. And so with the 5-day and the reduced quarantine that we've gone to in the last couple of weeks, we'll be using the district's latest 21-22 COVID-19 protocols in place of the decision tree.
Yeah, I apologize. I
Oh,
knew that
no
was there. I
problem.
just didn't access the table file, so I apologize for that. So, so my position is I do plan to support this. I think that we have said that our criteria and the decisions we made would be grounded in the science. I think that this exit criteria is tethered to science, and it's tethered to ensuring, that our, that we address what we had said to our stakeholders, that we would review we would constantly review the protocols, and that we would move forward with the exit criteria when we felt we could determine what that would be. I know, Dr. Hillman, how carefully you have worked on every aspect of this, have worked with our epidemiologists that we are fortunate to have doing pro bono work for us, and local physicians, and all of the science that really directs us to this protocol. And so I just appreciate all the work. And when we have 1,629 cases per 100,000 today, it doesn't seem like we're going to get there, but we do have this exit criteria, and we know at some point we will get there. So thank you for this criteria and all the work.
Thank you, Julie. Jeff?
No, she's over there.
Amy?
So I'm glad we're moving ahead with this today, even though initially I thought, wow, we're talking about this in the middle of Omicron. It's a crazy time, but I realized that our next board meeting isn't for 3 weeks. It's one of the longer spacing between board meetings. And a lot can happen in 3 weeks, and we may have a very, very different picture of what's going on with Omicron at that point. And it will be nice to at least have thought this through and probably moving it forward. That being said, I do have a question about the pre-kindergarten students, and I'm just trying to figure out what approach that is, because I haven't heard any projected dates when immunizations might be available. They are, less likely to have severe infections. Would they be in mass through the end of the year, months after everybody else, and possibly even next fall, if we put this in place? So if you could speak a little bit more on what your vision for the pre-K students are, and if at the end of the year, everybody else has masks off, are we just ending masks for the pre-K as well?
Yes, I would say that the protocols that we have in place are very clear for the 21-22 school year, right? So we would always bring you something updated for the end of the year. Here's what I've learned about pre-K and at the NCEC. Again, the concept of this piece was to ensure that we continued the mitigation protocols until the vaccination became an opportunity for those students. And I don't have an answer for you on when that will be available for the students under 5 years old, should those families choose that route. What I have learned is the most important thing in child care centers is that they stay open. That is the most important thing. The disruption that changes in daycare cause for, even when we do some quarantining, within our community education center, it is incredibly disruptive for people, but it pales in comparison to child care centers that just have to completely close. it's been very clear to me from the leadership of our early childhood programming that they will do everything they can humanly possibly do with mitigation strategies, recognizing that smaller kids are not. I've been there many times, just there today. And the younger kids are just as good as, I mean, it's tougher with younger kids, but you see younger kids who do just fine with it. You see younger kids who don't do as well with the masking protocol. But I also see that at our other buildings as well. And the key thing is using those tested mitigation strategies to prevent the center from shutting down. So I know the early childhood leadership, their focus is what does it take to make sure that we do not need to close the center. And these mitigation strategies are the best things that we have right now. What I'll also tell you is the feedback that I've got. We have some families in the early childhood center have been critical of. We have to acknowledge that. But my understanding is that the vast majority of families, that there are families who would leave if those protocols are not in place because they just don't feel that that would be the environment that they would want. It's a microcosm of the rest of the discussion. So again, remember that all of these things are in flux, right? So this is the exit criteria that we'd be adopting today to give us a point in the future where we can say, those are the conditions in which we would remove these protocols. That does not mean that they can't change. Doesn't mean that this board couldn't make other decisions or that I couldn't make other recommendations as you have empowered me to do so. But it's where we stand today. And what I will tell you is talking with early childhood folks, they are super focused on keeping the center open. Sometimes that means, unfortunately, some kids have to quarantine, but we have been able to keep it open. And if you talk with your friends, neighbors about the landscape of childcare right now, just go back to the Star Tribune article from a week ago on Sunday. It is creating a crisis for many parents when their centers shut down. And so we're doing what we can not to. Those are mitigation strategies that our early childhood, I think I can say, vehemently want to keep in place so that they are able to make sure that they can keep the center open.
Thank you. Jeff?
Just, one last point, even though like to your point, Amy, thanks for bringing that up. It's like matter of when we meet again. And I mean, one could look at this and you could, one of the things too, we do all kinds of, work sessions for lots of things. And I think that, I wonder, why we didn't do a COVID-19 policy work session. And then I would love to team up with somebody like Amy or whatever, and we can sit and go, let's look at all the districts, let's look at all these other stuff, and let's come and think, what do you like about this? What don't you like about that? And come back with, some really good ideas and things on that. But in a sense, I do like the idea that we are talking about exit strategy and there's some criteria here, even though there's things that I can't say yes to right now. I'm glad that we're moving in that direction. So, and again, I'm going to be a no vote on this, but it's a move in the right direction if it passes.
And Jeff, just in terms that we actually do very few work sessions. I think in my 12 years here, I can count on one hand how many work sessions we've done. But this is the third time that this grid
Right.
has been before the board. And the only feedback that I received
Right.
was around making sure that we adjusted from the decision tree to this piece in terms of from board members. So just,
And
just to be clear.
I'm just,
yeah,
to be clear too, I'm just giving you my opinion for all the things over
Absolutely.
the years. This is like, as you said, this isn't my first rodeo with 10 plus
That's right, yep.
years experience and things like that. And I know in a lot of things that we've done in the past where I've had that great opportunity to look at the 332 school districts, to look at the 5 school districts that we really compare ourselves with, to look at the conference and see how we compare and things like that. To me, a lot of this, and I'm not necessarily giving the negative. That's just, I'm laying it out, not saying how I would necessarily make a decision, but I think good leadership stands within the framework of being able to do that. And yes, we didn't do a work session on this, and there's a lot of things out there, but COVID is one of the biggest things. There aren't a lot of, it's a bit of a rant, but in a term for school board, in a 4-year period, there aren't a lot of things that are just, kind of like huge. And this is one of the, this is one of the most huge things that we're looking at, in our last 10 years or in our generation changes. So to the point of we're moving in the right direction, is good. Can I agree with a lot of these things? No, but I'm grateful I'm grateful that we're moving in the right direction. And Noel, did you have some comments? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else? Comments, questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second, and there's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, the exit criteria passes. Our final, oh no, we have two more items on the individual action. Let's see, this one is a resolution. Is there a motion to authorize the administration to make recommendations for additions or reductions in programs and for adding or discontinuing positions? Moved by Amy, second. Second by Tom. Dr. Hellman, can you share on this item?
Yep, this is the annual resolution that we use to kick off our staffing and budgeting process. And so the board has taken this action every year for some time. Usually it's I think at the first meeting in February, but we're asking you to take it now so we can get that process started.
If there board members, are there any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, Anita will conduct a roll call vote.
Broniak,
Aye.
Butler,
Aye.
Gerwitz.
Aye.
Gonzalez George,
Aye.
Pritchard,
Aye.
Cornell,
Aye.
Stratmon,
Okay, the motion passes. Right, we have one more item, and that is the retirement by agreement. It's in the table file. Do I have a motion to approve the retirement by agreement? Moved by Jeff, second by Tom. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. We're on to items for information. I have shared the committee assignments of board members for the 2022 calendar year. There were no changes except for Julie Pritchard and myself switched out several of our assignments, and I did have her on Northfield Forward in my place and then removed her as we already have two board members. Tom and Jeff are also assigned to that committee. So that is the only piece of information there. And then our future meetings. This concludes our business for tonight. Thank you, board members, for excellent engagement. Great questions. Our next meetings will be Mondays, 6 p.m., February 14th, 28th, and March 14th in the district boardroom. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Noel, second by Amy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.